Father's Day, the one day you'd think a man like me would feel celebrated. Instead, I sat alone. My family had made plans and somehow I wasn't part of them. The table was set, the reservation made, but not for me. At first, the sting of being forgotten cut deep. I felt invisible in the very family I had built with my own hands, but then something inside me shifted. If they wanted to ignore me, I'd give them a reason to remember me, so I took the reservation. And I showed up, not alone, but with surprise guests that made every jaw in the room drop. My name is Tom Montgomery. I'm 69 years old, and today I want to show you how even when your own family turns their back on you, there's always a way to reclaim your dignity, your justice, and teach a lesson they'll never forget. Before I share the full story, I just ask one thing: hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to that Father's Day when I realized being ignored was only the beginning. You know, for 43 years, I'd been the one organizing Father's Day. Every single year, I'd fire up the grill at dawn, prep the backyard, call everyone to make sure they were coming. The whole Montgomery clan would gather at my house in Chesapeake Bay, kids running around, adults arguing about politics over beer, and me, standing at that grill, spatula in hand, watching my legacy unfold before my eyes. I built Montgomery Marine Construction from nothing, started with a single boat and a dream in 1978, fresh out of the Navy. By the time I was 50, we were the premier marine construction company on the East Coast. Piers, docks, waterfront developments. If it touched the Chesapeake, chances are my hands built it. But more than the business, I built a family. 3 kids: Michael, 42, who runs the Baltimore office; Sarah, 39, who married that investment banker and moved to Annapolis; and David, 36, my youngest, who always said he'd take over the company one day. For decades, they'd show up every Father's Day with gratitude. Thanks, Dad, for everything you've done. Dad, you're the best. We're so lucky to have you. This year felt different from the moment I woke up. June 18th, 2023. The sun was streaming through the windows of my waterfront home, the same house I'd built with my own hands in 1985. But my phone was silent. No calls, no texts, no "Happy Father's Day, Dad." By 10 in the morning, I figured maybe they were running late. By noon, I started to worry. Had something happened? Was everyone okay? That's when I decided to drive over to Michael's house in Baltimore. Just to check. Just to make sure everything was all right. I pulled into his driveway, and there was David's truck. Sarah's Mercedes was there too. Through the window, I could see them all gathered in the living room, laughing, talking, completely relaxed. They weren't in trouble. They weren't hurt. They were just together. Without me. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to make sense of it. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe they were about to call me to come over. That's when I saw David walk past the window, phone in his hand. And I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. Yeah, the reservation's confirmed for 2 o'clock. All of us. It'll be nice to have a real Father's Day for once, without having to worry about Dad's mood swings. Mood swings? I'd never had a mood swing in my life. I was the steadiest man they knew, but then Sarah's voice drifted through the slightly open window. I still feel a little guilty, though. Should we have invited him? And Michael's response hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah, come on. Dad's been acting weird lately. All those stories about the old days, getting emotional about Mom. It's honestly embarrassing when we're trying to have a nice meal with our kids. The world stopped spinning for a moment. Embarrassing? The man who built everything they had was embarrassing, but David's voice was the knife that twisted deepest. Besides, he's been looking tired. I'm sure he'd rather rest at home anyway. This way we can actually enjoy ourselves without walking on eggshells. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart. That was still beating, though it felt like it was made of lead. Something deeper. The foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. They weren't planning a surprise. They were planning to exclude me on Father's Day. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The 20-minute drive from Baltimore back to my waterfront house felt like hours. Every Father's Day memory from the past 4 decades flashed through my mind like a cruel slideshow. 82. Michael, age 5, presenting me with a handmade card that said, "World's Best Daddy," in crayon. Sarah, age 2, toddling over with a dandelion she'd picked from the yard. "For you, Daddy." 1995. David graduating high school, giving his speech about how his dad was his hero, how Tom Montgomery taught him that hard work and integrity were the only things that mattered in life. 10. Sarah's wedding day, when she whispered in my ear during our father-daughter dance, "Dad, I hope my husband becomes half the man you are." 2018. My 65th birthday, when all 3 kids surprised me with a photo album titled "The Man Who Built Our World." Every page was filled with pictures of job sites, family gatherings, little league games I'd coached, school plays I'd attended. Michael had written in the inscription, "Dad, you didn't just build docks and piers, you built us." And now, 5 years later, I was embarrassing. I was someone they needed to walk on eggshells around. I was tired and should rest. At home. When had that shift happened? When had the man they called their hero become a burden they needed to manage? I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a long time, staring at the house I'd built with my own hands. Every board, every nail, every custom detail had been a love letter to the family I was raising. The wraparound porch where I'd taught all 3 kids to ride bikes. The workshop in the garage where Michael learned to use power tools, where Sarah built her science fair projects, where David and I restored a 1967 Mustang together. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was the physical manifestation of 43 years of fatherhood. And today, on Father's Day, it felt like a mausoleum. My phone buzzed around 4 o'clock. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Dad." His voice was artificially cheerful, like he was reading from a script. "Happy Father's Day. Hope you're having a good day." "Thanks, son." I kept my voice steady, controlled. "What are you up to today?" "Oh, just relaxing at home." Sarah and Michael came over for a bit. Nothing special. Nothing special. While they were out at some restaurant, having what David called a real Father's Day, they were telling me it was nothing special. "That's nice," I said. "Sounds like a good day for family time." "Yeah, exactly." There was a pause. "Hey, Dad, we were thinking maybe we could get together next weekend, take you out to dinner or something. Make up for being so busy today. Make up for being so busy. As if excluding me from Father's Day was just a scheduling conflict." "Sure, son. That sounds fine." "Great. I'll talk to Michael and Sarah and we'll figure out a good place." "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, David." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my empty house. Outside, I could hear families in neighboring yards, grilling, laughing, celebrating Father's Day the way we used to celebrate it. The way I thought we still did, but we didn't. Somewhere along the line, without me even noticing, I'd stopped being the patriarch of the Montgomery family and started being an obligation they needed to fulfill, a checkbox on their to-do list. Call Dad on Father's Day. Check. Lie about being busy. Check. Promise to make it up to him later. Check. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying their conversation in my head, looking for clues I'd missed. When had I become embarrassing? When had my stories about the old days become tiresome? When had my emotions about my late wife, their mother, become something that made them uncomfortable? Margaret had been gone for 3 years. Breast cancer took her slowly. and I'd held her hand through every chemo session, every difficult night, every small victory and devastating setback. When she died, I grieved openly. I talked about her often because she was the love of my life, the mother of my children, the woman who'd stood beside me as we built everything together. Was that embarrassing to them? Was remembering their mother publicly somehow making them uncomfortable? By dawn, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine and wait for their pity dinner next weekend. If my own children thought I was too old, too tired, too embarrassing to include in Father's Day, then maybe it was time to remind them exactly who Tom Montgomery was, and I knew exactly how to do it. Monday morning, I called my office and told them I'd be working from home for the week. 30 years of building Montgomery Marine Construction had earned me the right to take time when I needed it, and boy did I need it now. But I wasn't planning to rest. I was planning to investigate. You don't build a successful business without learning how to gather information, and you don't survive 43 years of fatherhood without knowing your children better than they know themselves. Michael, Sarah, and David thought they were so clever, excluding me from Father's Day and lying about it. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. I started with social media. Sarah was always posting pictures of family gatherings on Instagram. It was how she maintained her image as the perfect mother and wife. Sure enough, there it was, a photo from yesterday, taken at the Wharf restaurant in Baltimore. The caption, "Read, beautiful Father's Day lunch with my brothers, so grateful for family time. Family first. Grateful, Sunday, fun day family time, with her brothers." On Father's Day, the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but it was the comments that really got to me. Sarah's mother-in-law had written, "Looks like a lovely celebration. Where's Tom?" And Sarah had responded, "Dad's been under the weather lately. We thought it was best to let him rest. He would have loved to be there, though." Under the weather? I'd never felt better in my life. I was 69 years old, sure, but I still worked 10-hour days, still maintained my own house, still beat men half my age on the golf course every weekend. But there was something else in that comment thread that made my blood pressure spike. Michael's wife had written, "It's so hard when they start to slow down. You're good kids for being understanding." About his limitations. His limitations? What limitations? I'd just overseen the construction of a $30 million marina project in Ocean City. I'd negotiated contracts, managed crews, solved engineering problems that stumped men with half my experience. But somehow I had limitations that prevented me from eating lunch with my own family. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern. I checked Michael's Facebook page and found photos from Sarah's birthday dinner last month. A dinner I wasn't invited to because, according to the text I'd received, it was just going to be the kids and their spouses, nothing fancy. I found pictures from David's housewarming party 6 weeks ago, a party I learned about through a neighbor who mentioned seeing all the Montgomery kids celebrating together. When I'd asked David about it later, he'd said it was just a few people over for pizza, nothing worth mentioning. One by one, I was discovering a parallel family life that existed without me. Brunches, dinners, celebrations, gatherings, all happening regularly, all involving my children and grandchildren, and all excluding the man who'd made their lives possible. But it was what I found on Michael's laptop that really opened my eyes. Michael had always been careless with technology. He'd asked me to help him with computer problems, then leave his laptop open while he went to get coffee. This time his email was open, and there was a thread between him, Sarah, and David titled "Dad Situation." I probably shouldn't have read it, but they'd crossed a line yesterday, and I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The emails went back months, and they painted a picture of my children that I barely recognized. Michael, March 15th. I'm worried about Dad's mental state. Lately, He's been getting really emotional about Mom, almost like he's stuck in the past. Janet thinks he might be showing early signs of depression or even dementia. Sarah, March 16th. I've noticed that too. He tells the same stories over and over, and he gets this look in his eyes like he's not entirely present. Maybe we should start limiting his involvement in family decisions until we know what we're dealing with. David, March 17th. Honestly, guys, I think you're overreacting. Dad's just grieving. But I do agree that we need to be more careful about what we share with him. If his judgment is compromised, we can't have him making decisions about the business. Or the family finances. The business, the family finances. My life's work and my money. And they were talking about protecting it from me, like I was some kind of threat. But it was the most recent email exchange that really knocked the wind out of me. From just 2 weeks ago. Sarah. I've been thinking about what you said, David, about Dad's emotional outbursts. Richard, her husband, thinks we need to start planning for the inevitable. Dad's not going to be able to live independently forever, and when that time comes, we need to have a plan. Michael. What kind of plan? Richard somehow added to the email chain. The kind of plan that protects the family assets while ensuring Tom gets the care he needs. Assisted living facilities are expensive, but if we can establish that he's no longer competent to manage his affairs. I stopped reading. I couldn't finish that sentence because I knew where it was going. My own son-in-law was suggesting that my children find a way to declare me incompetent so they could take control of my money and put me in a home. 3 years after losing my wife, my children were already planning to warehouse me. I closed the laptop and sat in Michael's kitchen, my hands shaking with rage. These weren't the children I'd raised. These weren't the people I'd sacrificed everything to provide for. These were strangers wearing my children's faces, talking about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a father to be honored. But you know what? They'd just made a critical error. They'd underestimated their old man. Tom Montgomery didn't build a multi-million-dollar construction company by rolling over when people tried to steamroll him, and he sure as hell wasn't going to start now. If they wanted to treat me like I was incompetent, invisible, and embarrassing, then maybe it was. Time to show them exactly how competent, visible, and memorable their father could be. I had a Father's Day reservation to steal. And I had some phone calls to make. Tuesday morning, I sat in my home office with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad, planning like I was about to launch a new construction project, because in a way, I was. I was about to construct the most important presentation of my life. You see, what my children didn't understand was that Tom Montgomery had spent 45 years building relationships. Not just with clients and contractors, but with people who mattered. People who knew the real me, not the embarrassing version my kids had invented in their heads. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Well, I'll be damned, Tom Montgomery. The voice on the other end was gruff but warm. How the hell are you, little brother? Frank Montgomery was 73 years old, 4 years my senior, and the reason I'd gotten into construction in the first place. After Vietnam, when I was lost and didn't know what to do with my life, Frank took me under his wing at his engineering firm in Norfolk, taught me everything about building on water, about reading blueprints, about dealing with contractors who thought they could cut corners. We'd had a falling out about 10 years ago over something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now. Pride, probably. 2 stubborn Montgomery men who couldn't admit when they were wrong. But Frank was family, and family matters more than pride. Frank, I need a favor. Name it. I told him everything. The exclusion from Father's Day, the emails, the plan to declare me incompetent. Frank listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. Those ungrateful little shits, he said finally. Margaret would roll over in her grave if she knew what they were planning. I'm going to teach them a lesson, Frank, but I need your help. Whatever you need, Tom. Whatever you need. The second call was harder. I dialed a number I'd memorized but hadn't used in 3 years. Hello. The voice was tentative, probably because she didn't recognize my number on her caller ID. Hello, Patricia. Another long silence. Patricia Monroe had been Margaret's best friend for 30 years. When Margaret got sick, Patricia was there for every treatment, every hospital stay, every difficult decision. She'd been like a sister to my wife, which meant she'd been like family to me. But after Margaret died, Patricia had distanced herself from our family. I never understood why until now. Maybe she'd seen something in my children that I'd been too. Blind to notice, Tom. Her voice was cautious but not unfriendly. How are you holding up? I've been better, Pat. Listen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When Margaret was sick, did they ever say anything to you about me, about my mental state or my ability to take care of things? The silence stretched so long, I thought she might have hung up. Tom, she said finally, I think you and I need to have lunch. We met at Captain White's Seafood, a little place on Kent Island that Margaret and I used to love. Patricia looked older than I remembered, but then again, grief ages all of us in different ways. I probably should have called you before now, she said after we'd ordered. But I didn't know how to tell you what I knew without betraying confidences. What? Confidences? She sighed and looked out at the water. About 6 months before Margaret died, Sarah came to see me. She was worried about you, she said, about how you were handling Margaret's illness, about whether you were making good decisions about her care. My coffee went cold as Patricia continued. She wanted to know if I thought you were struggling mentally, if I'd noticed any signs of confusion or poor judgment. She said she and her brothers were concerned that you might not be able to handle things on your own after Margaret was gone. And what did you tell her? I told her the truth, that you were the most devoted husband I'd ever seen, that you were handling an impossible situation with more grace and strength than anyone had a right to expect. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. But Tom, I got the feeling that wasn't the answer she was looking for. The pieces were falling into place. My children hadn't just started planning to declare me incompetent after Margaret died. They'd been laying the groundwork while she was still alive. There's something else, Patricia said. After Margaret's funeral, Michael approached me about Margaret's jewelry. He said you'd been talking about giving it all away to charity, and he was worried you weren't thinking clearly. He wanted to know if I could help them preserve it for the grandchildren. Margaret's jewelry. I'd never said anything about giving it away. In fact, I'd specifically told the kids that I was saving it for my granddaughters when they got older. I told him to talk to you directly about it, Patricia continued. But Tom, the way he asked, it felt like he was trying to get me to go behind your back. I sat there processing what Patricia had told me, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. My children hadn't just excluded me from Father's Day on a whim. This had been years in the making. They'd been building a case against my competency while their mother was dying, positioning themselves to take control the moment they felt they could get away with it. Pat, I said, I need another favor. Anything. I need you to come to lunch with me this Sunday, the Wharf Restaurant in Baltimore, 2 o'clock. She raised an eyebrow. Is this about getting back at the kids? This is about reminding them who their father is. Patricia smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. Margaret always said you were the smartest man she knew. I think she'd approve of whatever you're planning. Will you come? Wouldn't miss it for the world. 2 down. 2 more calls to make. The third call was to Captain Jim Rodriguez, my best friend from the Navy, and the man who'd stood beside me as my best man 44 years ago. Jim had retired from the Navy as a full captain and now ran a successful charter, a fishing business out of Annapolis. More importantly, Jim knew my children as well as anyone outside the family. He'd watched them grow up, attended their graduations, their weddings. He'd been an honorary uncle to them their entire lives. "Tommy!" Jim's voice boomed through the phone. "What's the occasion? You finally ready to admit that I'm a better fisherman than you?" "Jim, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." I laid out the whole story again. The Father's Day exclusion, the emails, the plan to declare me incompetent. Jim listened with the same focused attention he'd used to navigate destroyers through enemy waters. "Those kids need their asses kicked," he said when I finished, "and I'm just the man to do it. I'm not looking for violence, Jim. I'm looking for witnesses. Witnesses to what? To the fact that Tom Montgomery is far from finished." The fourth call was the hardest of all. I dialed a number I'd called thousands of times over the years, but not once in the past 6 months. "Hello. Hello, Elizabeth." My ex-wife's voice was careful, controlled. We'd been divorced for 15 years, but we'd maintained a civil relationship. For the sake of the children, Elizabeth had remarried a nice enough guy named Robert who treated her well and stayed out of family business. "Tom, this is unexpected." Elizabeth and I had divorced when the kids were all adults, after 28 years of marriage that had simply run its course. No drama, no fighting, just two people who'd grown apart and decided to be honest about it. She'd moved to Rehoboth Beach with Robert, and I'd stayed in Chesapeake with Margaret, whom I'd married 2 years later. The kids had adjusted to the divorce better than either of us had expected. They'd even grown to like Margaret, though they'd always maintained a closer relationship with their biological mother. "Elizabeth, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have the kids been talking to you about my mental state? About my ability to take care of myself?" The pause was answer enough. "What have they told you?" I pressed. "Tom, I don't think this is—" "Elizabeth, please, this is important." Another sigh. "Sarah called me a few weeks ago. She was concerned about you. She said you'd been acting strangely since Margaret died, getting confused about things, making poor decisions. She wanted to know if I thought you might need help, what kind of help. Professional help, or maybe assisted living, somewhere you could be looked after properly." The betrayal cut deep. My ex-wife, my children, my son-in-law. They'd all been having conversations about my future behind my back, treating me like I was already gone. "And what did you tell Sarah?" "I told her that she needed to talk to you directly about her concerns, that it wasn't my place to make judgments about your mental state." Elizabeth's voice softened slightly. "Tom, are you okay? Really okay?" "I'm fine, Elizabeth, better than fine, but I need to ask you for something." "What?" "I need you to come to lunch with me this Sunday, Baltimore, 2 o'clock. "Tom, please, Elizabeth. I need people who've known me for decades to see me as I really am, not as my children have decided I've become. I need witnesses to the fact that Tom Montgomery is still Tom Montgomery." The silence stretched between us. 44 years of shared history weighing on the phone line. "What restaurant?" she asked finally. "The Wharf. And Elizabeth, bring Robert if you want. The more witnesses, the better." When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power, control. The satisfaction of a plan coming together. My children thought they could manage me, exclude me, plan my future without my input. They thought I was too old, too tired, too embarrassing to include in their perfect family gatherings. Sunday, they were going to learn exactly how wrong they were. But first, I had one more call to make, the most important one of all. Wednesday. Morning, I drove to the Wharf restaurant in Baltimore. It's the kind of place that caters to professionals and politicians, white tablecloths, harbour views, wine lists thicker than most novels. The kind of place my children chose because it made them feel sophisticated and important. The kind of place where Tom Montgomery was known by name, Mr. Montgomery. The maître d', a slight man named Antoine, who'd been working the lunch crowd. for over a decade, greeted me with genuine warmth. "So good to see you again. Will Mrs. Montgomery be joining you today?" "Actually, Antoine, I need to discuss something rather delicate with you." I explained the situation carefully, professionally. My children had made a reservation for Father's Day under the Montgomery name, but they'd failed to include me. I needed to make some adjustments to the reservation, expand it to accommodate additional guests, ensure we had the best table available, and most importantly, ensure that I was recognized as the host when my family arrived. Antoine's expression shifted from confused to indignant as I told the story. "Mr. Montgomery, this is unconscionable on Father's Day of all days. I'm hoping to turn it into a teaching moment," I said, "but I'll need your help." "Anything you need, sir. Anything at all." We spent an hour going over the details. The reservation would be expanded from 6 people to 10. We'd have the corner table with the best harbor view. Antoine would personally seat my guests and ensure that when my children arrived, there would be no question about who was in charge of the gathering. "And, sir," Antoine said as I prepared to leave, "if you don't mind me saying, what your children did is shameful. You've been a valued guest here for years. You've brought business partners, celebrated family milestones. You're the kind of gentleman this establishment is honored to serve." Thursday, I spent the day at Montgomery Marine Construction's main office in Annapolis, not because I had urgent business to attend to, but because I wanted to remind myself of what I'd built. The office walls were covered with photos spanning 4 decades, construction sites, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, awards from the Maryland Maritime Association, pictures of me with governors and senators and business leaders. My office manager, Helen, had been with the company for 18 years. She'd watched my children grow up, attended their college graduations, knew the family history better than most relatives. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, bringing me my afternoon coffee, "you seem different today, more energized. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Helen. Better than fine. Tell me something. In your opinion, do I seem like a man who's losing his mental faculties?" Helen nearly choked on her own coffee. "Mr. Montgomery, what kind of question is that? You're sharper than executives half your age. Just last week, you caught that error in the Ocean City contract that would have cost us $200,000. Why would you even ask such a thing?" "Just curious about outside perspectives." "Well, my perspective is that anyone who thinks Tom Montgomery is anything less than brilliant is either blind or stupid." Friday evening, I had dinner alone in my house, looking out at the Chesapeake Bay through the windows I'd installed with my own hands. The water was calm, reflecting the last light of the day like a mirror, peaceful, serene. The kind of evening that usually made me feel grateful for the life I'd built. But tonight, I felt something else, anticipation. Tomorrow was going to be the most important day of my post-Margaret life, and I was ready for it. I thought about the 4 people who would be joining me at lunch. Frank, my older brother, who'd taught me everything about construction and integrity. Patricia, Margaret's best friend, who'd seen me at my most vulnerable and knew the truth about my character. Jim, my Navy buddy, who'd stood beside me through war and peace. And Elizabeth, my ex-wife, who'd shared 28 years of my life and knew me better than almost anyone on earth. Each of them had agreed to come, not because they wanted to help me get revenge on my children, but because they were genuinely outraged by what my children had done. Each of them had seen something in Michael, Sarah, and David that I'd been too blind to notice. Each of them had been waiting for me to open my eyes. Tomorrow, my children would walk into the wharf, expecting to enjoy their real Father's Day without the embarrassment of their aging father. Instead, they'd find themselves face to face with people who remembered what Tom Montgomery really was and what he'd accomplished while his children were busy planning his irrelevance. I raised a glass of Margaret's favorite wine to her photo on the mantel Tomorrow, sweetheart, I said aloud. Tomorrow our children learn what happens when you underestimate a Montgomery. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling like I was 25 again. Sharp, focused, ready to conquer the world. I showered, shaved carefully, and put on my best navy suit, the one Margaret had bought me for our 10th wedding anniversary. The one that made me look like the successful businessman I'd worked 40 years to become. Before leaving the house, I made one final check of my phone. 3 missed calls from David, 2 from Sarah, 1 from Michael. All from last night. All probably. Wondering why I hadn't called to confirm our make-up dinner plans for next week. I didn't call back. They'd see me soon enough. The drive to Baltimore felt like riding into battle, which in a way it was. But this wasn't about destruction. This was about restoration. This was about reminding my children and myself exactly who Tom Montgomery was and what he'd earned through 4 decades of building, providing, and sacrificing. I pulled into the wharf's parking lot at exactly 1:30 p.m. Frank's truck was already there. So was Patricia's sedan. Jim's convertible was parked near the entrance, and Elizabeth's car was pulling in just behind me. My witnesses were assembled. My table was waiting. My children had no idea what was about to hit them. It was time for the real Father's Day to begin. Stood outside the Wharf restaurant at 1:45 p.m., watching my past walk toward me in the form of 4 people who'd shaped my life in fundamental ways. Frank arrived first, looking every inch the successful engineer he'd always been, his silver hair perfectly styled, his handshake as firm as it had been when we were young men, learning to build things that would last. "Little brother," he said, gripping my shoulder, "you look good. Better than I expected after hearing what those kids of yours have been up to." Patricia came next, elegant in a way that reminded me painfully of Margaret. She'd dressed for the occasion. This wasn't just lunch, it was a statement. "Tom," she said, kissing my cheek, "Margaret would be so proud of you today." Jim Rodriguez arrived like he always did, with presence. Even in civilian clothes, Captain Rodriguez commanded attention. His posture, his bearing, his eyes that missed nothing. "Tommy," he said, "I've been looking forward to this all week. Time to remind some people about respect." Elizabeth was the last to arrive, and seeing her brought back a flood of memories. Not romantic ones, those had faded years ago, but memories of shared struggles, of building a family together, of 2 young people who'd worked their asses off to give their children everything they'd never had. She looked nervous but determined. "Hello, Tom," she said simply. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "I'm reclaiming my family." Antoine greeted us at the entrance like we were visiting dignitaries. "Mr. Montgomery, your table is ready. We've prepared everything exactly as you requested." The corner table was perfect, positioned so that anyone entering the restaurant would see us immediately, with a clear view of the harbor that showcased Baltimore at its finest. Antoine had outdone himself with the setup. Fresh flowers, the best china, wine glasses that caught the afternoon light like crystal. This wasn't just a table, it was a stage. We settled in, and I looked around at these 4 people who represented different chapters of my life. Frank, who'd taught me that. Integrity wasn't negotiable. Patricia, who'd shown me that friendship could survive even death. Jim, who'd proven that loyalty earned in youth could last a lifetime, and Elizabeth, who'd shared the journey of raising 3 children we'd both thought we'd raised right. "Before they get here," I said, "I want you all to know what this means. To me, for months I've been questioning myself, wondering if maybe I really was, becoming the burden they seemed to think I was. Having you here today, it reminds me who I actually am." "Tom," Frank said, "you built something from nothing multiple times. Men like us don't become burdens, we become legends. And sometimes legends need to remind people why they became legends in the first place." Patricia nodded emphatically. "Margaret used to say that you were the strongest man she'd ever known. Not because of your muscles, but because of your character. That doesn't just disappear because you turned 69. Jim leaned forward, his captain's instincts engaged. "Tommy, I've served with heroes, and I've served with cowards. Heroes don't stop being heroes just because their kids get too big for their britches." Elizabeth, who'd been quiet, finally spoke. "Tom, I may not be married to you anymore, but I spent 28 years watching you sacrifice everything for those children. If they can't see that, then they need glasses." At exactly 2:00 p.m., the restaurant's front door opened, and my heart rate spiked despite my outward calm. But it wasn't my children. It was a young couple, probably tourists, looking around uncertainly. "They'll be here," I said more to myself than to my companions. "They're always exactly on time for reservations." "What if they don't show?" Elizabeth asked. "Oh, they'll show," Frank said grimly. "The question is what they'll do when they see us." At 2:07 p.m., I spotted them through the window. Michael's BMW was pulling into the parking lot, followed by Sarah's Mercedes and David's truck. They were all here. The whole family, gathering for their real Father's Day lunch without the embarrassment of their father. I watched them get out of their cars, laughing about something, completely relaxed and carefree. Sarah was wearing a sundress that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Michael had on a polo shirt and khakis, his casual wealth uniform. David looked the most like me at his age, tall and broad-shouldered, but wearing an expression of entitled comfort that I'd never possessed. "Here they come," I said quietly. My 4 companions straightened in their chairs, and I felt their solidarity like a physical force. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, I wasn't facing it alone. The restaurant's front door opened, and Michael entered first, scanning the room for their table. I watched his expression change from casual confidence to confusion to something approaching panic as his eyes found me. "Dad?" His voice carried across the restaurant, causing several other diners to look our way. "What are you? How did you?" Sarah appeared beside him, and her face went white when she saw not just me, but the 4 people sitting around me. "Oh my God," she whispered, but in the restaurant's acoustics it might as well have been a shout. David brought up the rear, and when he saw our table, he stopped dead in his tracks like he'd walked into a glass wall. Antoine appeared beside them, with practiced efficiency. "The Montgomery party, I assume? Your table is ready. Mr. Montgomery has been waiting for you." The way Antoine emphasized Mr. Montgomery left no doubt about who was hosting this lunch. My children stood frozen in the entryway while other patrons began to notice the drama unfolding. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We had a reservation." "The reservation is under the Montgomery name," Antoine replied smoothly. "Mr. Montgomery made arrangements to accommodate additional guests. If you'll follow me, please." I stood as they approached, every inch the successful businessman I'd spent decades becoming. "Michael, Sarah, David, so good to see you. I'd like you to meet my lunch guests." The introductions were excruciating. Frank stood and extended his hand to Michael, who looked like he was meeting a firing squad. "I'm Frank Montgomery, Tom's older brother. I've heard so much about you over the years." Michael shook Frank's hand limply, his eyes darting between me and his siblings like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Patricia rose gracefully, every inch the Lady Margaret had always admired. "Sarah, dear, I'm Patricia Munro, your mother's best friend. You look so much like her when she was your age." Sarah's face crumpled slightly at the mention of Margaret, but she managed a weak smile. Jim Rodriguez didn't bother with pleasantries. He stood to his full height and fixed each of my children with the stare that had intimidated junior officers for 30 years. "I'm Captain Rodriguez, retired Navy. Your father and I served together." The implication was clear. Your father is a man who earned respect through service and sacrifice. Elizabeth's introduction was the most devastating of all. "Hello, Michael, Sarah, David." Her voice was cool, professional. "I suppose you weren't expecting to see me today." My ex-wife's presence hit them like a physical blow. David actually stumbled slightly as he moved toward his chair. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I was invited," Elizabeth replied simply, "by your father, for Father's Day lunch." The silence that followed was deafening. Other diners were openly staring now, sensing the family drama unfolding at the corner table. My children stood beside their chairs like defendants waiting for sentencing. "Please," I said, gesturing to the empty chairs, "sit down. We have a lot to talk about." They sat mechanically, their faces ranging from confused to terrified. Michael kept glancing around the restaurant like he was looking for escape routes. Sarah was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. David couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "I have to say," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet restaurant, "this is the best Father's Day I've had in years. Having all these important people from my life gathered together, sharing a meal, celebrating everything we've built together over the decades." Frank raised his water glass. "To Tom Montgomery," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "the finest man I've ever known, and the best father these children could have asked for." "To Tom," Patricia echoed, her voice warm with genuine affection. "To Tommy," Jim added, his captain's voice carrying military precision. "To Tom," Elizabeth concluded, her eyes fixed on our children's faces. My children sat in stunned silence as 4 accomplished adults toasted me at a Father's Day lunch they'd specifically excluded me from. The irony was so thick you could serve it as soup. "Now then," I said, settling back in my chair with the satisfaction of a man who just played his opening gambit in a chess match, "let's talk about family." If my children thought the lunch was awkward now, they had no idea what was coming next. The waiter approached our table with the kind of nervous energy that comes from sensing family drama, but not knowing how to navigate it. "Can I start you folks with some appetizers? Perhaps some wine?" "Absolutely," I said, with the confidence of a man completely in control of the situation. "Bring us a bottle of the 2018 Napa Valley Cabernet, the good stuff. Today's a celebration." Michael's eyes widened. That particular wine cost $200 a bottle, more than he usually spent on alcohol in a month. But today wasn't about money. Today was about making a statement. As the waiter left, an uncomfortable silence settled over our table. My children sat, like defendants in a courtroom, while my 4 guests radiated the kind of calm confidence that comes from being on the right side of a moral argument. Frank broke the silence first, his engineer's mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Tom's been telling us about your concerns regarding his mental state," he said, addressing my children with the directness of a man who'd spent 50 years solving problems. "I have to say I'm confused by these concerns." Sarah's face went pale. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Patricia interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years as a high school principal. "Tom shared with us the emails he found on Michael's laptop, very concerning. Reading, Michael looked like he was about to be sick. Dad, you went through my private emails." "Son," I said calmly, "you left your laptop open in my presence while discussing plans to have me declared incompetent. At that point, privacy becomes a secondary concern." Jim Rodriguez leaned forward, his captain's bearing making him seem larger than life. "In the Navy, we had a term for what you kids are doing. We called it mutiny, and we dealt with mutiny swiftly and decisively." Elizabeth hadn't spoken since the introductions, but now she fixed her children with a stare that could freeze fire. "I want you to understand something," she said, her voice low but carrying clearly. "When Sarah called me to discuss your father's declining mental state, I knew exactly what was happening. I've seen this before with other families, adult children who mistake normal grief for incompetence, who confuse emotional availability with weakness." "Mom, that's not—" David started. "Don't interrupt me," Elizabeth snapped, using the tone that had ended arguments throughout their childhood. "I may not be married to your father anymore, but I know him better than anyone at this table. Tom Montgomery at 69 is sharper, more capable, and more accomplished than most men half his age. The fact that you can't see that says more about your judgment than his. The wine arrived, and I made a show of tasting it and approving the selection. The waiter poured glasses for everyone, and I noticed my children's hands were shaking as they reached for their wine. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at Tom Montgomery," Frank said, raising his glass. "I see a man who built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. I see someone who employed hundreds of people over 4 decades, who completed projects on time and under budget, who earned the respect of governors and senators and business leaders throughout the mid-Atlantic." Patricia nodded emphatically. "I see a man who held his wife's hand through 18 months of cancer treatment, who never missed a single chemotherapy appointment, who stayed strong for her when she couldn't stay strong for herself. If that's what you call mental decline, then we need to redefine the term." Jim's voice carried the weight of military authority. "I see a man who served his country with honor, who built something lasting, who raised 3 children and gave them every advantage in life. What I don't see is a man who deserves to be excluded from Father's Day by the very children he sacrificed everything to raise." The restaurant around us had gone quiet. Other diners were openly listening now, drawn by the drama playing out at our table. A few were nodding in agreement with my defenders. One elderly woman at a nearby table was wiping tears from her eyes. Elizabeth delivered the final blow. "What I see," she said, her voice rising slightly, "are 3 adults who have confused their father's generosity with weakness, who have mistaken his emotional openness for instability, and who are planning to repay 40 years of sacrifice with betrayal." Sarah started crying. Not the gentle tears of someone moved by emotion, but the ugly sobbing of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "You don't understand," she said between sobs. "We weren't trying to hurt him. We were trying to protect him." "Protect him from what?" Frank demanded. "From family dinners? From Father's Day celebrations? From having a voice in decisions about his own life?" Michael found his voice finally, though it came out as a croak. "Dad's been acting strange since Mom died, getting emotional at weird times, telling the same stories over and over. We thought—" "You thought what?" Jim interrupted. "That grief has a timeline, that mourning follows a schedule convenient to your social calendar." "Margaret was the love of his life," Patricia added, her voice fierce with protective anger. "They were married for 27 years. She died 3 years ago. If Tom wants to get emotional talking about her, if he wants to tell stories about their life together, that's not mental decline. That's love." The silence that followed was broken by applause from nearby tables. Other diners had heard enough to understand what was happening, and they were taking sides. An elderly gentleman at the table next to ours raised his wineglass toward me. "To fathers who deserve better," he called out. More applause followed. Other patrons began raising their glasses, turning our family confrontation into a public vindication of everything I'd worked to build. But I wasn't finished yet. If my children thought public embarrassment was the worst thing that could happen to them today, they were about to learn otherwise. "Now that we've established that I'm not mentally incompetent," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the restaurant, "let's talk about what happens next." My children looked like they were waiting for execution. They had no idea how right they were. What would you do if you had total victory within your grasp? Would you go for the kill shot, or would you find another way? Let me know in the comments below what you think I should do next. The truth is, what I did next surprised even me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder that I'd been carrying like a weapon for the past week. The sound it made when I placed it on the white tablecloth was soft, but in the tense silence of our corner table, it might as well have been a gunshot. "Before we discuss the future," I said, opening the folder, "let's review the present." The First document I pulled out was a printout of Sarah's Instagram post from Father's Day, the one where she'd celebrated family time with my brothers, while lying about my being under the weather. "Sarah," I said, sliding the paper across the table to her, "would you mind reading this caption out loud for everyone to hear?" Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the paper. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't." "Allow me," Frank said, taking the paper from her shaking hands. In his clear engineer's voice he read, "Beautiful Father's Day lunch with my brothers. So grateful for family time. Hashtag family first. Hashtag grateful. Hashtag Sunday fun day." He looked up at Sarah with disgust. "Family first, that's rich." The second document was a screenshot of the email thread I'd found on Michael's laptop. "Michael," I said, "this is from your email dated March 17th. The subject line is Dad's situation. Would you like to explain to everyone what situation you were referring to?" Michael looked around the restaurant desperately, as if searching for help that wasn't coming. "Dad, please, not here, not in public." "Oh, but this is exactly where it needs to happen," Patricia said coldly. "In public, where people can see what kind of children Tom Montgomery raised." I pulled out the third document, a bank statement, showing the joint account that Michael controlled, highlighting several large withdrawals made without my knowledge or consent. "This is interesting reading," I said, "particularly the $15,000 withdrawal 3 weeks ago. Michael, what was that money used for?" Michael's face went from pale to grey. That was for Sarah's daughter's wedding deposit. We were going to tell you." "When?" Elizabeth demanded. "When were you going to tell him, after you'd had him declared incompetent and couldn't question your spending decisions?" The revelation hit like a physical blow. Not only had they been planning to exclude me from family decisions, they'd already started spending my money without permission. But the fourth document was the one that really made the table go silent. It was a printout of an email from Sarah to a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but a specialist in elder law, who dealt specifically with competency hearings. "Sarah," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "you want to explain this consultation request dated 2 weeks ago? The one where you inquire about the process for having an elderly parent declared incompetent in Maryland. The entire restaurant could have heard a pin drop." Sarah's sobbing intensified until she was hyperventilating. David had gone completely silent, staring at his hands like he could disappear if he avoided eye contact long enough. Jim Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "In my 30 years of military service, I've seen a lot of betrayals, but I've never seen children plot against a parent who gave them everything. This isn't just ungrateful, it's despicable. The truly heartbreaking part," Patricia added, "is that Margaret would be devastated if she knew what you were planning. She used to worry that you kids would never appreciate what your father sacrificed for you. Turns out she was right." I gathered the documents back into the folder and set it aside. "Now that we've established what you've been doing behind my back," I said, "let me tell you what I could do with this information." The temperature at our table seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could take these documents to the State Bar Association and have that lawyer's license reviewed for unethical consultation practices. I could take the bank statements to the police and file charges for financial elder abuse. I could take the emails to a private investigator and have them build a case for conspiracy to commit fraud. My children looked like they were watching their entire futures crumble in real time. "But more importantly," I continued, "I could take all of this to my lawyer and remove every single one of you from my will. Not just reduce your inheritance, eliminate it entirely. Leave everything to charity or to people who actually appreciate what I've built." Elizabeth leaned forward, her voice deadly serious, "and he'd be completely justified in doing exactly that." The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable for everyone in the restaurant. Other diners were watching our table like it was live theatre, and in a way it was. This was the climax of a family drama 40 years in the making. "So here's what's going to happen," I said finally. "We're going to finish this lunch. We're going to have civilized conversation about family, about respect, about what it means to honor your parents. And then we're all going to go home and think very carefully about what kind of people we want to be." Frank raised his wine glass again. "To second chances," he said, "and to children smart enough to recognize when they've been given one. To redemption," Patricia added. "To learning from mistakes," Jim contributed. "To family," Elizabeth concluded, "when it actually acts like family." My children sat in stunned silence as 4 accomplished adults toasted the possibility that they might yet save themselves from their own greed and selfishness. But I still had one more surprise for them. The biggest one of all, and it would come when they least expected it. Thanks for following along with this story. If you think I'm being too harsh on my children, or if you think they deserve what they're getting, let me know in the comments. The ending is going to surprise you, I promise. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because you're not going to want to miss how this all turns out. The truth is, everything I'd done so far was just preparation for what came. Next, the main courses arrived with impeccable timing, as if Antoine had been orchestrating the entire afternoon like a symphony conductor. The food was exquisite, exactly the kind of high-quality meal my children had hoped to enjoy, without their embarrassing father present. As we ate, something interesting happened. The conversation began to shift. Frank started telling stories about our childhood, about the young Tom Montgomery who'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, who'd come home from Vietnam, determined to build something meaningful with his life. "People don't understand what your father accomplished," Frank said, addressing my children while cutting his salmon. "In 1978, he had nothing. No money, no connections, no family business to inherit. Just a willingness to work harder than anyone else, and a reputation for keeping his word." Patricia shared memories of Margaret, but not the sanitized version my children preferred. She talked about the real Margaret, the woman who'd worked nights as a bookkeeper while raising 3 kids, who'd made Halloween costumes from scraps and stretched every dollar until it screamed. "Your mother never forgot where she came from," Patricia said. "She used to tell me that the only difference between her and people who had less was luck and hard work. She never took anything for granted. Jim's stories were different, military, precision mixed with genuine affection for the man I'd been and the man I'd become. Your father saved my life in Saigon, he said matter-of-factly. Not in some dramatic firefight, but through months of small decisions, daily choices to have. My back when things got difficult. That's who Tom Montgomery is, a man who shows up when it matters. Elizabeth's contribution was the most powerful of all, because she knew my children better than anyone else at the table. When you were growing up, she said, your father never missed a single school event, not one, not when he was working 20-hour days trying to land his first big contract, not when he was spending his weekends building our kitchen with his own hands because we couldn't afford contractors. He made choices every single day to put his family first. With each story, I watched my children's posture change. The defensive anger gradually gave way to something else, recognition maybe, or remembrance of who I used to be to them before I became a burden to be managed. David was the first to crack. Dad, he said quietly, I remember when you taught me to use power tools in the garage. I was maybe 8 years old, and you spent the whole weekend showing me how to measure twice and cut once. Because precision matters, I replied, the words automatic after decades of saying them. Yeah, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Because precision matters. Sarah looked up from her untouched meal. Dad, I'm sorry about the Instagram post. I I don't know what I was trying to do. It was wrong. Michael, who'd been silent for most of the meal, finally found his voice. The emails were... Jesus, Dad, reading them back like that, hearing how they sounded. We weren't trying to be cruel. We thought we were being responsible. Responsible for what? Frank asked. For taking care of him when he couldn't take care of himself anymore, Michael replied. Dad's 69. He lives alone. He's been emotional since Mom died. We thought... You thought he was becoming incompetent, Elizabeth finished. Without ever asking him how he felt about his own life. Without ever considering that grief and incompetence are two completely different things, Patricia added. Without ever wondering if maybe your father's strange behavior was just a man processing the loss of his wife while dealing with children who'd stopped seeing him as a person, Jim concluded. The words hung in the air like an indictment. My children sat with them, visibly struggling to reconcile their perception of my decline with the evidence of my competence sitting right in front of them. But I could see something else in their faces now. Relief. The kind of relief that comes from realizing you haven't lost something precious. You've just been looking at it wrong. I need to ask you something, I said, setting down my fork. All of you, when did you stop trusting me? The question caught them off guard. Sarah started to answer, then stopped. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. David just stared at his plate. Because that's what this is really about, I continued. Trust. For 40 years, I made decisions that protected this family, that built our future, that gave you opportunities I never had. And somewhere along the line, you decided I couldn't be trusted to make decisions anymore. It wasn't that we didn't trust you, Sarah said carefully. It was that we were scared. Scared of what? Scared of losing you, she whispered. The way we lost Mom. The admission hit the table like a physical blow. Frank set down his wine glass. Patricia reached for her napkin. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart, I said, my voice softer than it had been all afternoon. You can't lose me by including me. You lose me by pushing me away. Michael's voice was barely audible. We thought we were protecting you from having to make difficult decisions. We thought if we handled everything, you could just rest. But I don't want to rest, I said. I want to live. I want to be part of this family until the day I die, even if that means being emotional sometimes, even if that means telling the same stories about your mother that I've told before, even if that means being less sophisticated than you'd prefer for your social circle. The silence that followed was different from the tense quiet that had characterized most of our meal. This was the silence of people processing truth, of family members seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. But I still had one more revelation to share, the biggest one of all, and it was going to change everything. As our waiter cleared the main course plates, I reached into my jacket pocket one more time. But instead of pulling out another document, I retrieved a small, wrapped box. The kind that usually contained jewelry. Before we finish today, I said, placing the box in the center of the table, there's something else you need to know. My children looked at the box with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. After the afternoon they'd had, they probably expected it to contain evidence of some other transgression. 6 months ago, I began, after I started noticing that I wasn't being included in family gatherings, I made a decision. I went to see my doctor, Dr. Reynolds. I asked him to run every test imaginable. Cognitive function, memory, psychological evaluation, the works. Frank leaned forward, interested. What did you find out? I found out that there's nothing wrong with me. Cognitively, psychologically, physically, I'm in better shape than most men my age. I gestured toward the box. Those are my test results. Every single one, normal across the board. Sarah's face crumpled. Dad, why didn't you tell us? because I wanted to see how far you'd go with your concerns about my mental state before checking whether those concerns were actually valid. The weight of that statement settled over my children like a heavy blanket. They'd spent months planning my future based on assumptions they'd never bothered to verify. But here's the thing, I continued, and this is what I really want you to understand. Even if those tests had shown problems, early dementia, cognitive decline, whatever you were worried about, that wouldn't have given you the right to exclude me from Father's Day. It wouldn't have justified making decisions about my life behind my back. It wouldn't have made it okay to treat me like I was already gone. Elizabeth nodded emphatically. People with cognitive challenges still deserve dignity. They still deserve to be included in their families. They still deserve love and respect. What your father is saying, Patricia added, is that you took away his agency before you even knew if there was a medical reason to be concerned. You decided he was declining, and then you started treating him accordingly. Jim's military training showed in his direct approach. In command situations, we call that failure to gather intelligence before taking action. It's a dangerous way to make decisions about people's lives. Michael looked like he was going to be sick. Dad, we weren't trying to take away your agency. We were trying to be responsible. By whose definition? Frank challenged. By what standard is excluding your father from family events responsible? I thought we were protecting him, David said weakly. From what? I asked. From the embarrassment of having a father who mourns his dead wife? From the inconvenience of including someone who might tell stories you've heard before? From the social awkwardness of admitting that your 69-year-old father is still sharp enough to see through your plans? The restaurant around us had gone completely quiet. Other diners were openly listening now, and I could see some of them nodding in agreement with my words. A few elderly patrons looked like they were fighting back tears. Here's what I've learned in the past 6 months, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the restaurant. I've learned that growing old in America means constantly having to prove that you're still worthy of respect. I've learned that adult children sometimes mistake their own anxiety about aging for evidence of their parents' decline. And I've learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. The silence that followed was profound. My children sat with their heads down, finally understanding the full weight of what they'd done. But now came the moment I'd been building toward all afternoon, the revelation that would either heal our family or end it forever. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my other jacket pocket. I pulled out another document, this one legal-sized and official-looking. This is a revised will. I had it drawn up last week. My children's faces went white. They probably expected to learn that they'd been disinherited, that their greed and betrayal had cost them everything. I want to read you the relevant section, I said, unfolding the document. To my children, Michael, Sarah, and David Montgomery, I leave the entirety of my estate, including Montgomery Marine Construction, all real estate holdings, investment accounts, and personal property, to be divided equally among them. The confusion on their faces was immediate. That wasn't what they'd expected to hear. However, I continued reading, this inheritance comes with one condition. Each beneficiary must spend a minimum of 50 hours annually volunteering with organizations that serve elderly populations, nursing homes, senior centers, Meals on Wheels programs, or similar organizations. This requirement continues for as long as they receive benefits from the estate. Frank smiled broadly. Brilliant. Furthermore, I kept reading, each beneficiary must write and submit an annual letter describing what they've learned about aging, dignity, and respect through their volunteer work. These letters will be shared with all family members and will become part of the permanent family record. Patricia was practically glowing with approval. Margaret would have loved this. The point, I said, folding the will and setting it aside, isn't to punish you, it's to educate you. You're going to spend time with elderly people who've been abandoned by their families, who've been dismissed as burdens, who've been forgotten by the very children they raised. And maybe, through that experience, you'll understand what you almost did to me. Sarah was crying again, but these weren't tears of shame or fear. These were tears of relief and gratitude. Dad, I'm so sorry. We're all so sorry. I know you are, I said gently. And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. It means learning from it and making sure it never happens again. David found his voice. The volunteer work, it's actually a good idea. I think we need to understand what we almost became. Michael nodded emphatically. Dad, can I ask you something? Would you be willing to help me understand where we went wrong? I mean, really understand it. Because sitting here today, listening to all of this, I'm horrified by what we planned to do to you. Of course, I said. That's what fathers do. We teach, even when our children are adults who should know better. The laughter that followed was tentative, but genuine. For the first time all afternoon, we sounded like a family again. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, other diners began approaching our table. An elderly woman with kind eyes stopped beside my chair. Excuse me, she said, but I couldn't help overhearing. I just wanted to say that your children are very lucky to have a father like you. My own children. She trailed off, then composed herself. Well, let's just say not every family gets the second chance yours is getting today. A middle-aged man shook my hand. Sir, what you did here today took courage and wisdom. I hope your children understand how fortunate they are. As we walked toward the exit, Antoine approached with the check. Mr. Montgomery, he said quietly, this meal is on the house. What happened here today? That's what family should look like when it's working right. Outside the restaurant in the Baltimore afternoon sun, my children and I stood together for the first time in months without tension, without hidden agendas, without the weight of unspoken resentments. Dad, Sarah said, would you like to come to dinner at my house next weekend? I mean really come, not as an obligation or because we feel guilty, but because we want you there. I'd love that, I said. And Dad, Michael added, no more secrets. No more emails about Dad's situations. If we have concerns, we talk to you directly, like adults. That's all I've ever wanted, I replied. As they walked toward their cars, Elizabeth lingered behind with me. You did good today, Tom, she said. Margaret would be proud. I hope so, I said. I really hope so. Frank, Patricia, and Jim gathered around me as my children drove away. Think they learned anything? Jim asked. Time will tell, I replied, but I gave them a chance to learn. That's all any parent can do. 6 months later, I received the first of my children's annual letters. Sarah had volunteered at a memory care facility and written about an 82-year-old woman whose children visited once a year, out of obligation. Michael had worked with Meals on Wheels and described meeting elderly men who hadn't had a real conversation with family members in months. David had spent time at a senior center and written about the difference between aging with dignity and aging with neglect. Each letter was thoughtful, genuine, and showed real understanding of what they'd almost done to me. More importantly, each letter was accompanied by photos of them with the elderly people they'd been serving. Not for social media, but because they'd genuinely come to care about these forgotten members of our community. Today is Father's Day, 2024, exactly 1 year after the day that almost destroyed our family. I'm writing this from my backyard in Chesapeake Bay, where my children and grandchildren are gathered for the kind of celebration we used to have. Loud, chaotic, filled with love and respect and genuine appreciation for what family means. They still tell stories about that lunch at the wharf, not with shame, but with gratitude for the lesson they learned and the second chance they received. They've become advocates for elderly rights in their communities, and they've never again made the mistake of confusing their father's grief with incompetence. As for me, I'm still running Montgomery Marine Construction. I'm still telling stories about Margaret that make my children misty-eyed. I'm still insisting on doing things my way because experience has earned me that right. But most importantly, I'm still their father, not their burden, not their embarrassment, not their responsibility. To manage their father. And finally, they remember what that means. So here's my question for you. Have you ever written off someone as too old, too set in their ways, too much trouble to include? Have you ever decided that excluding someone was kinder than dealing with their inconvenient emotions or outdated stories? If so, maybe it's time to reconsider. Because the elderly people in your life, your parents, your grandparents, your neighbors, they're not burdens waiting to be managed. They're libraries waiting to be read, wisdom waiting to be shared, love waiting to be appreciated. And one day, if you're lucky enough to live that long, you'll be the one hoping that someone sees your value instead of your limitations. Don't wait until it's too late to get this right. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the elderly, people in your own life, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me about a time when you underestimated someone because of their age, or about an older person who surprised you with their wisdom and strength. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because next week I'm sharing another story about family, respect, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And remember, every Father's Day, every Mother's Day, every ordinary Tuesday is a chance to show the people who raised you that their sacrifices mattered, that their love was worth something, that their stories are still worth hearing. Don't waste those chances. You never know how many you have left. Until next time, this is Tom Montgomery, reminding you that age is just a number, but respect is forever. Thanks for listening.